Today we're going to pick up where Pastor Dennis left off last week. We're in this short little series before Easter in John chapter 6. And so last week, Pastor Dennis brought to life the miracle of Jesus turning 5 small loaves, as he showed you, and 5 small fish into food for 5,000 people. It's amazing. The last verse that he read was verse 15 of John chapter 6, and it says this: "Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him," that's Jesus, "by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself." Matthew's gospel in chapter 14, verse 23 tells us what Jesus did when he withdrew. He didn't go withdraw and just go sit there. Didn't go withdraw and do nothing, right? He withdrew and he went and he prayed to the Father. I could preach a whole sermon on just that one concept of how we need times to just get alone with God and talk to him without distractions and all that. It's a great concept. It's a great message. I'm pretty sure I've preached it before, but this is not normal. You know what most people do after something great happens? Like, man, I just was able to feed 5,000 people. Let's go celebrate, right? You win a championship, right? You hit a game-winning shot. Yeah. Shout out to March Madness, right? You do that, right? You get a promotion at work. All this stuff happens. You're like, man, let's go out and celebrate with people. But Jesus is with no one except for him and the Father, and he's praying. And then we'll pick up in verse 16, and we'll look at verse 17 to get us started with our text for today. It says, "When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them." What is he doing? He's praying. You know, this week's text is not far behind last week's text. Last week's text, the miracle is included in all 4 Gospels. It's the only miracle included in all 4 Gospels. This miracle that we're about to see is included in 3 of the 4 Gospels. But the other 2 Gospels, Luke's the one that doesn't have it, the other 2 Gospels give us a detail that John's doesn't, and the detail they give us is that Jesus told them to get into the boat. John's Gospel they go get in the boat. But the thing that really helps us is like, why? It's because Jesus told them to. They're being obedient. And it probably didn't seem like a big deal, right? This would be like, you drove up 95 north somewhere, and now you got to come back 95 south, right? They went across the sea, and now they got to go back. The issue is not, do we have to go back? The issue is when. Do we go back tonight? Do we go back in the morning? Do we go back in the middle of the night? All that stuff, right? You make different choices based on that. Like today, we get out our phones, at least some of us, and we check Google Maps, traffic, and they're like, oh, I'm 6 hours away, and it only should take 2. Well, I'm going to wait because I don't want to do that, right? And so we plan around that because we have something. But remember, this is 2,000 years ago, and their transportation to where they went and back was a boat. And it's not like the boats we have today. I have my captain's license or my whatever boat driving license. I'm not an official captain's license, but I can drive a boat, right? I can drive any boat that's like up to like 30-something feet, and I like it. But the boats are way better than their boats. Here's a picture of a boat that like what it would look like. And so obviously, that's like you can go see that boat today, okay? That's not what it looked like 2,000 years ago. But you can bet that boat didn't have like 2 motors on it and a cabin with air conditioning and navigation and lights. Like this is a boat that if you put it on the water today and went out in the Chesapeake Bay, you're getting pulled over. They're like, this boat doesn't have life jackets, it doesn't have flares, it doesn't have a horn, it doesn't have what do you call it? You have to have a radio to talk to someone. Like these are all like, They literally, I've been on boats and they board you. It's so freaky. Like they come up and they're like, we're about to board your boat. And they get on your boat and they're like, show me the life jacket. They're like, can you leave me alone? But that's what they're doing. They're trying to make sure you're safe. None of these boats in that day, the best boat wasn't even safe. They just had this piece of wood. And it floated, right? Some people like to claim that Jesus was actually on this boat. That I'm sure gets people in the museum, but it's possible. They don't know. They don't know who was on the boat. Somebody was on the boat 2,000 years ago, and it survived. They found it. I think they found it like at the bottom of the sea, but it's from the Sea of Galilee. So it could have been Jesus' boat. But I bring this up because this trip to get in that boat, right, there's no motor, you got to row. To get across the Sea of Galilee, if you just went from east to west, it's going to take you about 2 hours, okay? Not that long if you consider rowing. But I've been on jet skis that go 70 miles an hour. Like, it's a nice jet ski, but like supercharged, all that stuff. I could get across the Sea of Galilee in one of those jet skis in 5 minutes. So 2 hours is like, that's a long time compared to today, right? You're like, we're not going that far, right? But it is far. It's like 8 miles across, right? So it would take them 2 hours if they were to row and the conditions were good. That's not what they had. It says they start across, and it gives us the detail. Jesus is not with them. Then verse 18 says, the sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. Show of hands. Do you have any kayakers here? Right? Like, we're probably not going to get into one of those wooden boats and try to row it, like, to get somewhere, like, as our, like, a ferry. We're probably not going to do that. But a lot of people today kayak. It's kind of like a cool thing to do. And so I kayak, paddleboard, all that fun stuff. And what you do when it's windy, or you should do, is paddle into the wind so that way you don't use up all your energy going with the wind, and you're like, wow, we're going so fast because the wind's blowing you. Like, you're not going, like, the wind is pushing you. And then you have no energy to get back, and so you have to call someone. Like, listen, this is not 2022. Have you seen the commercial of the paddleboarder? You know what I'm talking about? The Apple Watch commercial. And the dude is on the paddleboard, and he's like, I've been blown out to sea. Come and rescue me. And he pushes his watch, and they come with a helicopter and save him. Like, I don't know if that actually works. I don't want to try it. But, like, they had stuff. Right? We have stuff. Even without that, you have a phone. Like, when I go out, I have a phone with a waterproof bag. I can still call. I don't need a watch, but I can call someone to come rescue me. There are people who can get to me really fast wherever I am if I'm on the boat. They didn't have any of that. They had nothing. But the thing about being on a vessel in the wind without a motor is you can't just, like, sit still. If you get tired, you're getting blown the other way. So you have to, like, even if you just wanted to stay still, unless you, like, drop anchor, is just paddle, 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 paddle. And this is, by the way, 84 feet is the average depth of the Sea of Galilee. So, like, dropping anchor is not like, oh, let's just drop anchor for 5 minutes. No, like, that's a big deal. To get your anchor to go down 84 feet and catch, and then, like, you would need, like, 300 feet because you need it. If you just go straight down, you're just going to drag. You're still going to get blown. This situation is not a good one for them. It's not boding well. And Matthew's gospel tells us that they were still at this in the fourth watch of the night. Fourth watch, we go to first watch. Fourth watch, we know what that is, but 3 to 6 a.m. is what the fourth watch of the night is. They started in the evening. How long is it supposed to take? 2 hours. That's 9 hours. And it tells us in the other gospel that they're in the midst of the sea. Verse 19 tells us that they had gone about 3 to 4 miles. They've spent 4.5 times the time it should have taken, and they're only halfway. And they're exhausted. My first thought is, who forgot to check the forecast? Like, for real. Like, when I'm in charge, like, I'll take people fishing. Like, I've taken people here fishing. Like, if I say, hey, take off Monday because we're going to go fishing, I'll take you out on the boat, all that stuff. And I look, and the forecast says 40-mile-an-hour winds, 7-foot waves. I'm like, I'm not going. I'm just not. That's miserable, dangerous, all that stuff. Like, you're going to be throwing up. And I've done it with people. They're like, we're going to go anyways. I'm like, okay. And then they're throwing up the whole time. It's like, I'm not throwing up because I take Dramamine, but you're throwing up, right? And so it's like that's what we do, where we check it and we can make a decision. They didn't have that. Like I could look right now and tell you what the weather is underneath the Chesapeake Bridge, right? I could tell you if you want to go out, like what the waves are. Like we have all that high-tech stuff. They didn't have any of that, but guess what they had? Jesus. Jesus is better than those apps. Sometimes I've gone out and the app's like tomorrow, or you could look a week in advance. In a week, it's going to be this bad, and then you go and it's fine, right? You're just like, well, we're just going to take our chances. And then it's like, well, the weather was wrong. If Jesus was the weatherman, he'd never be wrong, right? It'd be awesome. He'd be rich, even though he doesn't need your money. But think about it. Jesus sends these people out onto the sea knowing the conditions. He knew what was going to happen. So let's try and put ourselves in the disciples' shoes. What might they have been thinking? Remember, this isn't the first time that in this time that they're in disciples and not just regular guys, that they're in a storm, right? They probably were in storms other times, but they were in a serious storm in Mark chapter 4, and Jesus is in the boat, and Jesus is sleeping, and they wake Jesus up, and they are like, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to die? And he gets up and just goes out and he says, peace, be still, and everything calms. We love that story. They've experienced that. They know that Jesus can calm the sea, that Jesus could literally be like, wind, turn around, blow that way. Could do that. But he's not doing that, and he's not there. So I wonder if some of them are frustrated that Jesus didn't just say, hey, you guys should wait till the morning, because in the morning the wind will die down and it'll be a lot easier to get across. But Jesus sends them out when it's windy. So what do you think about that? What do you think about that? Is that cruel of Jesus? Like, you just come to the opinion about this story, because some would argue that Jesus thought, or he believed that leaving them there with the crowd who was trying to take Jesus by force to be king was more dangerous than sending them out in the boat. And so the idea there is that, Jesus didn't cause the storm. He just knew the storm was coming, and so he made a decision between the which one was worse. And so he sent them, well, that one's really bad, this one's not as bad, so I'm going to send you to the one that's not as bad. It's possible that that's what is going on, but what we have to come to terms with is this isn't the story of Jonah. The story of Jonah is way easier for us to understand because, I know there's miraculous things in there that are like, wow, that's crazy, but just the concept that if I am told by God to do something and I run away and a storm comes, that shouldn't surprise us, right? But they do what Jesus tells them to do, and they're in a storm. And you're like, that's not supposed to be like that, at least if you believe the prosperity gospel. If I follow Jesus, everything should get easier. Why is it so hard? Here's what I think this story is meant to show us. It's our main point for today, is that it's this. Jesus is greater than our limitations. Jesus is greater than our limitations. The disciples are going to realize that they are not Jesus. Yes, they were used by Jesus to be a part of this distributing of these loaves and the bread, and so people were looking at them and being like, wow, you guys are awesome and all that stuff. But the disciples are humans who follow Jesus, humans who need Jesus. They can't calm the storm. They can't muster up more strength just to get across in a reasonable amount of time before they run out of energy. The disciples are being confronted with their limitations. This is one of the things I believe we all have to come to grips with at some point in our journey with Jesus, that we can't do everything. But Jesus has to show them something before he can teach them this main point, that he's greater than the limitations. He's got to teach them this. This is our first point, is that sometimes you try your best and it's still not enough. I really don't like that point. I don't. I wish I could stand up here and say what many people like to say, God won't give you more than you can handle. Show me that in the Bible. because it's not there. What the Bible says is God won't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, and in the temptation, he'll provide the way of escape, right? That's the biblical teaching that can get misapplied to circumstances. And say that. Jesus, in this story, knowingly sends his disciples into a situation that's too hard for them to handle on their own. Maybe it's to protect them, but regardless of the reason, it's still too much for them. He gives them more than they can handle. You know, Jesus could have given his disciples jet skis. I told you about those jet skis that I was on, supercharged jet skis, go 70 miles an hour. Jesus could have given that. Like, you're like, how could he? Listen, Jesus knew how to make next year's model jet ski 2,000 years ago. He already knew. Like, if there's some new technology, supercharged, turbocharged, stacked on top of each other, nitrous injected, all that stuff, Jesus could figure that out. He could just make them appear. Here's 12 jet skis. People are like, what's that? He could have done that. Like, we're like, that's the stuff from the movies. Jesus can do stuff from the movies. He could have done that, but he doesn't. Jesus could have turned the wind around and made it blow faster. Jesus could have just stopped the wind so they get across in 2 hours like normal, but he doesn't do that. He's letting them realize that their best is not always going to be enough. What if the difficult thing that you're facing in life right now, what if the challenging circumstance that you feel like is about to break you, what if the purpose of it is to help you come to grips with your limitations? What if it's to help you get to the place where when Jesus offers to help you, you say, yes, please. I'm not going to pretend like I can do it on my own anymore. What if that's the point? I want you to look at verse 19, and we'll see that Jesus comes to them. It says, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. They're frightened because people don't walk on water. Mark's gospel tells us that they thought it was a ghost, because what else is it going to be? People, when they stand on top of water, sink, right? Like, how is this? How are we seeing this? Is this an illusion? Are we delirious? Is it a ghost? Like, I don't have an explanation for this. Like, you guys know who Michael Phelps is? Michael Phelps could have swam in a storm. Like, I have no doubt that he could swim from wherever they started 3 or 4 miles to get to them. But even Michael Phelps can't swim down to the bottom, 84 feet, push off hard enough, get all the way to the top, and stand on the water long enough for it to look like he's walking. Like, he could get to them, and he could wave and be like, hey, guys, I'm here, and I'm going to be your motor, and kick all the way there. Like, he could have probably, like, pulled, but he's not walking on the water. People can't walk on the water, and Jesus doesn't walk on the water. I don't know why. I just pictured this being like, you know, they're just kind of like over there, and everybody could see them, and Jesus just kind of walks out there, and it's like, you know, maybe like 8 feet deep, like you're at the beach, you know, not that far, and it's like, you know, it's cool, but you know what? 3 to 4 miles. I don't like to walk that far, but that's an hour at an average pace. Jesus isn't walking on the water for 2 seconds. He's walking on the water for an hour. It's like, oh, well, somehow he figured out to run fast enough to stay on top of, no, it's an hour. 3 to 4 miles, and Jesus is just walking like the storm is, they're like, whoa, they're just trying to stay still and try to move like an inch, and Jesus is just walking. He walks up to them, and I think what we're meant to see at this point is this, our second point. Nothing is too difficult for Jesus. Nothing is too difficult for Jesus. This walking on the water is the 5th of the 7 signs that John includes for us. Jesus did many other miracles, did many other amazing things, but John says that these were included so that we would believe, the readers would believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, that by believing we'd have life in his name. Last week, with the feeding of the 5,000, that was number 4. This week, walking on the water is number 5. And the point of these 7 miracles is not for us to waste our lives like some scholars do, trying to figure out some recognition of like illusion or some way that it could have not been a miracle. That's clearly not what John is trying to do. He's trying to show you there's no explanation for this other than he's God. That's the point. But we get a contrast. The disciples who find it too difficult to row into the wind, even though they would row all the time, and then Jesus, who's walking on top of the water that's giving them so much trouble. We have the disciples on one hand with their limitations, and then Jesus on the other hand with his infinite power. You know, all it takes in our lives to break us of our self-sufficiency, of our belief that we can do it all, is just a little wind, just a little illness, just a little bad breaks, and we go from feeling like, no, I don't need any help. I can take on the world, and then few little things come in, and we realize that we are humans and we have limitations. But it's not so for Jesus. You know what Colossians 1:15-17 says? It says, he, that is Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. It's a beautiful text. It's a beautiful picture of the uniqueness of Jesus. Jesus can walk on water because Jesus created water. It was created through him, and it was created for him. He already showed them that he can calm a raging sea by telling it to be still, and now he shows them that he can walk on the sea. But the disciples are scared. They think it's a ghost, and we're going to find out how he responds in verse 20. It says, but he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. I tried to think about how other people might respond, right? You don't have to put a face on it, but there's other people, if they could walk on the water and get out there, they might say something different. You weaklings, how you didn't make it by now? You've had 9 hours and you're still not there? What's wrong with you? Right? Say, just get out of the way. I'm so disappointed in you. Let me just do it for you. Could have done that. But Jesus is aware of their emotional state, and he speaks directly to it. He doesn't just fix the problem. He says, it is I, do not be afraid. In Greek, it is I is ego ami, which is the same phrase that we find translated I am. Just like there are 7 signs in John's gospel, there are 7 I am statements, and this actually isn't even one of the official ones, but it's the same words in Greek. I am. It's a big deal because when God speaks to Moses in Exodus chapter 3 in the burning bush, and he tells Moses, you're gonna help the people get out of slavery, and Moses is like, well, I'm talking to a bush. Who should I say sent me? He says, tell them I am sent me to you. When Jesus says, I am, when he says, ego and me, he's saying, I am God. Just like God spoke to Moses in the burning bush, God is here speaking because I am God, and I am here with you. Do not be afraid. In the Old Testament, we read time and time again that if God is with you, you don't need to be afraid. The most famous of all, the one you put on the coffee cups, is Joshua 1:9, right? Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. I like to make people uncomfortable with this text by saying, well, God just said that to Joshua, right? He didn't say it to you. He said to Joshua, so what about you? And I'm like, oh, they're get uncomfortable. And I'm like, you just got to keep reading. Right? Just keep reading. You find it in Isaiah, right? You find it in Matthew, in the Great Commission, when it says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And then there's the promise, behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Not I am with you sometimes, which is exactly what the disciples would have felt like when they're rowing for 9 hours without Jesus. Always. And what he says before that is good news as well. In verse 18 of Matthew 28, he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. I have the authority to make water walkable. All authority in heaven and on earth. Don't be afraid. Trust what I tell you to do. But let me show you one last thing in this text that really impacted me as I studied. It's in verse 21. And it says this, then they were glad to take him into the boat. And immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Notice that Jesus doesn't force himself into the boat. It says they were glad to take him into the boat. When Jesus says, I am, do not be afraid, they're like, all right, you can get in. Please get in. Like, now. You see the result. Immediately, they were at the other side. When Jesus arrives, they're in the midst of the sea, and when he gets in the boat, they're there. And I've seen enough like science fiction movies to like come up with 10 different ways that this could have happened, right? Like even like The Incredibles is a great one if you haven't seen it, to like watch and picture like how somebody's in the middle of the sea and then they get out of the sea to land. Like they have visuals of it. I know it's a cartoon, but like you could spend a lot of time trying to like figure it out. But the point is not how did they get there so fast. The point is when they didn't have Jesus in the boat, they couldn't get there. And when Jesus got in the boat, they're there. That's the point. And so our last point for today, one that I find pretty challenging, to be honest, is this. We must learn to gladly accept Jesus' help. How many of you struggle to accept help? Anybody? I think a lot of people struggle to accept help, right? I do. It's a humbling thing. It's a humbling thing to admit that you can't handle what you could say life throws at you, but you could also say what Jesus allows in your life if you believe in the sovereignty of God. So I can't handle it on my own. But I want to help you by just using this text to just open your mind to the possibility that Jesus can tell you to do something with the purpose of you realizing that you can't do it without his help. And that could be the whole point. Is that Jesus, I need you. Jesus, I need your help. This thing is too difficult for me. I'm not confused about what you told me to do. I'm confused about how I'm supposed to do it on my own. And Jesus is like, you're not supposed to do it on your own. You're supposed to wait for me, and I'm going to come help you. You know, what if the point is not that we need to get stronger, right? The story doesn't say, and they were rowing and they prayed and Jesus made their muscles have more strength and gave them more energy until they made it to the other side. That's not what the story says. The story says Jesus shows up. Jesus sends them help, but the way he sends them help is he sends them himself because he's walking on earth at this time. And I'm learning that just as Jesus used this water as a bridge to get to where he needed to get to his disciples, he can use other things that he created to get to us, to bring us the help we need as well. Other things that he created. You're like, what are you talking about? Like people. Like Jesus created water, but he also created people, and he created all people. And so think about it. Jesus could be sending you help through another person. And you're like, well, do they need to be a Christian? Did Jesus only create Christians? Like Jesus created all people. All of them. And he can help you through people. I don't know why, but like starting to think about that makes it easier for me to accept the help, because I'm like, if someone says, hey, do you need help? My first instinct is like, no, I got this, right? But if I'm like, well, Jesus is sending me help, well, Jesus knows me better than I know myself, and he knows I need help. And so if he sent them, all right, I'll take it. I need it. What we don't want to be is like the guy in what some call the parable of the drowning man. You ever heard of that? You know that story? I'm going to read it to you. It says, a fellow was stuck on his rooftop in a flood. He was praying to God for help. Soon a man in a rowboat came by, and the fellow shouted to the man on the roof, "Jump in, I can save you." The stranded fellow shouted back, "No, it's okay. I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me." So the rowboat went on. Then a motorboat came by. The fellow in the motorboat shouted, "Jump in, I can save you." To this, the stranded man said, "No, thanks. I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me. I have faith." So the motorboat went on. Then a helicopter came by. The pilot shouted down, "Grab the rope, I will lift you to safety." To this, the stranded man again replied, "No, thanks. I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me. I have faith." So the helicopter reluctantly flew away. Soon the water rose above the rooftop, and the man drowned. He went to heaven. He finally got his chance to discuss this whole situation with God, at which he exclaimed, "I had faith in you, but you didn't save me. You let me drown. Why?" To this, God replied, "I sent you a rowboat and a motorboat and a helicopter. What more did you expect?" You think about it. I think sometimes we're like that guy. And we're like, "Jesus, I need help." And he's sending us help, but we don't think it's the way he should be helping us. We think he should help us by literally walking up to us like he did on the boat. But I don't know about you, but that's never how Jesus helped me. By literally leaving the right hand of the Father, coming down to earth and walking over and helping me like that. But he sends me help all the time. But it's a mindset shift where it's like, no, the help that comes my way might be help that Jesus has sent me. And it may be big things or it may be little things, but it's nonetheless something that I should thank Jesus for. But I got to be humble enough to say, yeah, I do need that help, and I'm going to be thankful for the help, which will make me glad when the help arrives. Here's the thing that gets me. As believers, we, maybe other people this doesn't relate to, but as believers, we have a faith that's based on the truth that we need help, that we couldn't rescue ourselves. That's the whole, we were helpless. It says, while we were dead in our trespasses and sins, Christ died for us. There was nothing we could have done to save ourselves. And I think where we get twisted up is we think that something about that helplessness changes when we accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior. When we become a born-again believer, we're like, well, things should just automatically now be easy, but that's not in the Bible. That's not what we're taught. What changes when you place your faith in Jesus Christ is your sins are forgiven. And Jesus is with you, but you're still needy. And you still need help from Jesus. But what we saw today, and what we know to be true, is that Jesus is greater than our limitations. That he can help us despite our weaknesses, and he is with us. Before I let you go today, I do, of course, have some next steps to help you apply this to your life. And so I'm going to encourage you to get out your phone, scan the QR code. If you pull it up and you don't get it quick enough, zoom in, and it'll work. If you're new with us, we'd love to connect with you. You can give us some way to do that. Email address. If you give us your mailing address, we'll mail you a card, right? We can go old school. Whatever you give us, we will use. But you can let us know if you have prayer requests. Let us know if you have interests. Maybe you want to be baptized or you want to serve. There's all those things on there. But we ask that you would let us know which next steps you're taking so our prayer team can be praying for you this week as you take those next steps. I want to encourage you to do that. But next step A is this. Ask Jesus to help you. Don't miss the fact that in the story there's no record of them asking Jesus for help. Jesus just shows up. They might have asked Jesus for help, but we're not told. Jesus can help you without you asking, but he can also help you if you ask. And so why not ask? Maybe you're in a jam right now and just say, Jesus, like you came to the disciples in a place where they thought you couldn't get to, can you send help to me? And I love this story because it gives us permission to admit that were struggling. And listen, this is something that they would have done all the time, cross the Sea of Galilee. It wasn't like a big deal, but it was this time. If you boil it down, this whole story is about an issue with transportation. Seriously. Like, we happen to drive cars, right? Maybe you have like some other ride a bus or a train, but like they took a boat and they couldn't get there. So maybe your issue is car trouble. Jesus can help you with that. It's a beautiful thing. So I want to encourage you to think about it. Do I need help? And then ask Jesus to help you. And then next step B is look for ways Jesus is sending you help. Jesus walked on water to get to his disciples. I am certain that if Jesus can walk on water, Jesus can get you the help that you need, right? He can use people that he created, but what we don't want to be is like the guy in the parable of the drowning man that turned down help because it wasn't what we expected. If help comes, accept it and thank Jesus for it. And then next step C, have a conversation with an unbeliever this week. This is our recurring next step for the entire year, where we are encouraging you to participate in our challenge, our conversation project, to talk to one unbeliever every week about your faith. Maybe it's this, because here's the reality. If someone is not a believer in Jesus Christ, they don't have this. They don't have a God who is with them in the troubles of life. They still have troubles, but they don't have someone to be with them. Our mission here is to help people find peace and purpose in Jesus. A conversation this week could be the first step in that direction. It could be about how Jesus has helped you. It could be about something else on the conversation guide that we've given you. It could be simply an invitation to the Easter egg hunt at Jefferson Elementary, and someone shows up to that, and then they show up on the Sunday after that, they hear the gospel preached, and maybe not just one person, maybe an entire family meets Jesus through a simple act of you inviting someone. I just want to encourage you to do that. You never know what God would do.